First of all, let me say, we clarify this because apparently it's been said that I declined into alcoholism immediately after that and I lost interest in football. I mean, the following year I was a league top scorer and we won the FA Cup at Wembley. So I'd hardly say that that was losing interest directly after the World Cup final. What it did for me was this. I was one of the few people who believed we would win it.
Jimmy Greaves, a name whispered in pubs and shouted from the stands, a striker who danced with glory but wrestled with demons. They say he could score with his eyes closed, but what secrets lurk behind the legend's final whistle? Jimmy Greaves was born in 1940. This bloke grew up in Essex, England, where he seemingly had a knack for finding the back of the net from a young age. Chelsea scouts spotted his talent sharpish, signing him up as an apprentice. They even called him one of Drake's ducklings. Can you believe it? Sounds like something out of a storybook, doesn't it? Now, young Jimmy didn't mess around. He banged in goals like they were going out of fashion, scoring over 100 in just 2 seasons for Chelsea's youth team. Blimey, the future looked bright. He even scored in the FA Youth Cup final, though Chelsea fell short in the end. Still, there was no denying his talent. Turning pro in 1957, Jimmy's journey took an interesting turn. He actually spent 8 weeks working in a steel mill during the summer break. Can you imagine a future football star grafting away in a factory? Shows you dedication, doesn't it? Fast forward a bit and Jimmy finds himself playing for AC Milan in Italy. Now, this is where things get a bit sticky. His time there wasn't quite the fairy tale everyone expected. But fear not, because Jimmy's story doesn't end there. He soon returned to England, this time playing for Tottenham Hotspur. Now, with Spurs, Jimmy truly came into his own. He lifted trophies left, right and centre. FA Cups, Charity Shields, even the European Cup Winners' Cup. Though the league title remained elusive, he helped Spurs to a cracking second-place finish. Celebrations happened. Jimmy liked his booze, a bit too much than the average player. But who knew this habit would catch up to him? Before we get into the juicier bits of the video, make sure to like and subscribe. But all good things must come to an end, and Jimmy eventually moved on to West Ham United. Sadly, he retired shortly after. Now, here's the surprising bit. After a 4-year break, Jimmy, despite battling alcoholism, decided to lace up his boots again. He played for several non-league teams before finally hanging them up for good in 1980. Talk about a bloke with a passion for the game. And Jimmy's impact wasn't just on the pitch, mind you. He scored a whopping 44 goals for England, even playing in the 1962 and 1966 World Cups. Now, the 1966 World Cup story is a bit of a heartbreaker. Jimmy got injured and lost his place to Geoff Hurst, who went on to become a legend himself. England won the World Cup. Jimmy only received his medal decades later due to a rule change. Talk about a bittersweet ending. After retiring, Jimmy enjoyed a successful career in broadcasting. You might even remember him alongside Ian St John on their show Saint and Greavesy. A right entertaining pair, those two. But Jimmy still dwelled on the glory days. Just like many other athletes, I mean, why wouldn't he? All over before you've even had a chance to contemplate what it all meant. That's the life of a footballer. Take Jimmy Greaves, for example. Bloke was young, invincible, and probably not pondering the future too much. Like Jimmy himself said, being young is for living, ain't no time to worry about tomorrow. Sounds all right on paper, doesn't it? But that carefree attitude can come back to bite you on the backside later, especially when you hit your 30s, and those glory days are just a distant memory. Jimmy saw it happen all too often. Blokes stuck in the past, clinging to their past successes, unable to move on. Right tragedy, this footballer's curse, he'd say. They get rid of old nags, right? Sometimes I reckon these players would rather that than face life after the whistle blows for the last time. They just can't find anything else to fill that gap, you see. So, how did old Jimmy fill that gap? Unfortunately, the bottle was his only companion. Right, so Jimmy Greaves called it quits at 30, a decision he came to regret later on. Stepping away from the pitch proved a right tricky business. He went into a packaging venture with his brother-in-law, but it just wasn't the same as the thrill of the beautiful game, you see. The tippling that had been a bit of a bother towards the end of his career turned into a full-blown problem. Lost the whole of the 70s, Jimmy said. Gone completely off the rails he was. From 72 to 77, he was drowning his sorrows, living in a boozy haze. Then, one bright morning, he woke up with a right jolt and realised the world had kept turning without him. On some days, he'd sink a whopping 20 pints of beer, then head home and polish off an entire bottle of vodka before kip. Talk about a recipe for disaster. He couldn't even start his day without a drink, keeping a bottle by his bedside for a cheeky morning tipple to steady his nerves. The booze aged him faster than you can say offside, turning a top-notch athlete into a sunken-eyed wreck in just 2 years. It wasn't just his looks that suffered, mind you. The drinking drained his bank account drier than a desert and ultimately led to his wife Irene leaving him. By the late 70s, Jimmy was living in a tiny flat, flogging jumpers for a living. It was a real rock-bottom situation. But thankfully, that's when things started to turn around. Even before I fully stopped, Jimmy says, I knew I had to give the booze the boot. It wasn't like flicking a switch, mind you. There was a spell in Worley Mental Asylum, a right grim place up the road. For most of 1977, that was a real wake-up call, let me tell you. Thankfully, in February 1978, Jimmy called it quits with the booze, and by his own admission, and with a touch of well-deserved luck, hasn't had a drop since. There are times the temptation comes knocking, of course, he admits. Same for everyone, really. You get a bit down, and a few pints might seem like a good idea, but I know I can't go down that road again. He calls himself a non-drinking alcoholic, which seems about right. Jimmy did call it quits on the bottle, but old habits catch up to you in one way or another, don't they? And they sure did in the most gruesome fashion. Still, Jimmy made debuts on the telly and had a good chuckle about himself and his alcoholic escapades.
As a result of that, you just left the game that day and hit the bottle. And
I didn't hit the bottle straight away. I mean, it was the 70s. Same sort of time as George. And we're thinking of doing a book on our drinking experiences, you know.
Really?
So if anyone can tell us where we were in the 70s.
Even legends like Jimmy Greaves aren't immune to the Grim Reaper's clutches. Remember him, the bloke who stared down the bottle and emerged a champion? Well, it seems fate had a different kind of fight in store for him. Back in 2012, a stroke sent a right jolt through everyone. But Jimmy, ever the fighter, bounced back after surgery. Had he used up all his 9 lives then? Sadly, 2015 proved a right cruel year. Another stroke hit him, robbing him of his voice. Weeks ticked by in intensive care, the doctors tight-lipped about his chances. Was this the end for the legend who defied the odds with his battles against the booze? But Jimmy wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. A month later, he walked out of the hospital, a testament to his stubborn spirit. They said he wouldn't walk again, but by 2016, he was proving them wrong once more, taking tentative steps with a wheelchair by his side. 2021 brought a bittersweet moment. Finally recognized for his contributions to the beautiful game, Jimmy received an MBE, a right honor indeed. He shared this with another legend, the last 2 blokes from the 1966 World Cup squad, to be acknowledged by the Queen herself. Then, on a strange twist of fate, September 2021 saw the footballing world fall silent. Jimmy Greaves passed away at his home the very same day as a Premier League match between Tottenham and Chelsea, the 2 clubs that defined his career. Both teams held a minute's applause, a fitting tribute to a man who battled demons on and off the pitch. Jimmy Greaves' story reminds us that even legends are mortal, but it's also a testament to the British spirit in it. That bulldog spirit, the one that keeps on fighting no matter the odds. Here's to you, Jimmy. And let's not forget the remarkable journey he took, from a young lad with a knack for finding the back of the net to a legend who graced some of the biggest clubs in England. The news of Jimmy Greaves' passing sent shockwaves through the footballing world. Tributes poured in, with Prime Minister Boris Johnson taking to Twitter to call him a goal-scoring legend and one of the greats of English football. England captain Harry Kane, who himself chases Greaves' record as Tottenham's all-time top scorer, simply stated that Greaves was a true legend. Former Spurs striker Gary Lineker couldn't have been more effusive. He described Greaves as a giant of the sport, quite possibly the greatest striker this country has ever produced, and a man who was charismatic, knowledgeable, witty, and warm. Beyond the accolades and praise, Jimmy Greaves leaves behind a loving family, his wife Irene, 4 children, and a growing brood of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Their loss is undoubtedly immense, but they can find solace in knowing that Jimmy's legacy will inspire future football legends. This drink's for you, Jimmy. That's it for this one. If you fancied our video on Jimmy Greaves, check out our video on Jimmy Case.